President Obama revealed his own health care plan earlier today. Among its surprises, more fees for drug companies above any included in the Senate bill. Well, joining us right now to really break it down is Richard Evans, managing partner at Sector Sovereign. That's a boutique research firm. By the way, he was rated the #1 pharmaceutical analyst by Bloomberg and Institutional Investor magazine when he was at Sanford C. Bernstein & Company earlier in the decade. So great to have you back with us.
Thanks, Carol.
Let me ask you, so in terms of what the president laid out, what does that mean for be it the drug companies, the insurers, in your view?
Yeah, sure. I think the first broad question is going to be whether or not anything passes, and I'm sure we'll come back to that, and I think the odds are still pretty remote. But what's changed here is for insurers, you've got what's called a rate regulatory commission proposed by the president. So you would basically have federal oversight of insurance markups or insurance rates, where right now that presides at the states. And that's one change. The other change is when we look at the pay-fors, the industries that are taxed to really provide money for the bill, pharma is really still in there with a big kind of $80 billion contribution, even though the bills are getting smaller. Other industries are not quite so heavily taxed. So
is it not fair in your view?
Well, it's disproportionate, I would say. Whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's what they negotiated is a different question. But if you look at, who's really under pressure at the industrial level to pay for the bill, sure, I think pharma is probably bearing more than their fair share of the burden.
So why? Who in pharma dropped the ball, or who in insurance got it right?
Well, I think, if you go back and look at, sort of whose house is held together through the reform debate, the one that hasn't has been pharma, right? So Billy Tozen, former congressman, Ways and Means, was let go from pharma a couple of weeks ago. And at some point in the process, clearly his representation of the pharmaceutical industry must have broken down because you've got this big commitment from pharma that's really, again, disproportionate relative to what other industries are being asked to do. So one speculates that he made commitments that the membership really wasn't interested in following through on.
But again, it's still early in the game.
Well,
or is it not? You sound like you don't really expect much in terms of reform.
I don't. Yeah, I don't expect it to pass. And, we're kind of looking at pharma being taxed disproportionately relative to other industries. But I think it's the end game, right? So if they're smart,
right.
and because things are probably not going to pass, I think what pharma probably needs to do is just stick on its message, right? Not do anything. Because, if you go back to the 90s when they ran Harry and Louise ads and reform died, honestly, I think the Democrats would love that because it would be a great way out of this whole reform is going to fail mess, because they'd have somebody to blame. So even though pharma looks to be taxed disproportionately, I think you should expect them to really do nothing. They're going to take the bet that the market's taking, that the reform effort simply is not going to pass.
Why are you so pessimistic about this measure passing? My understanding was that the Democrats could use reconciliation, and then they would only need 51%.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've got to go back through the House again, right? So there are a number of reasons. One is the abortion fight, right, which you've got to take on again if you put federal money into health care. But I think even before you get there, let's go back and look at Massachusetts. Obama won that state by 26 points, and you've got an anti-health reform Republican senator in Kennedy's seat in Massachusetts. And you go back to the House, you've got 39 House Democrats that voted yay on the House bill, where Obama won their district by less than 10%. Right, so you're going to go back and ask those guys to vote yay again, and you need all of them, every single one of them. Somebody's going to tell you no. I think a lot of them tell you no. So whatever happens Thursday, right, it's going to come out of Thursday, it's going to go back to Congress. I just can't see it getting past the House, much less into the Senate. And then can you go reconciliation? Yes, you can, but you can only take very small, non-complicated bills through reconciliation. Otherwise, they just get riddled with changes. And then finally, if you do that, the next 2 political years, if you go reconciliation on health care, are going to be full-on bipartisan opposition to everything. It's a very expensive political price to pay this early in the administration.
Well, Richard, do you think we need some kind of reform here?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt, we do. We absolutely need fundamental reform. But since very early in the process, we lost track of the notion of really reining in underlying health cost growth. And once we lost track of that, the economic utility of the reforms that were being proposed just wasn't there anymore. So unfortunately, it's probably good that this reform effort is failing. But the problem is we're not going to come back to it politically for another decade. And by then, we're going to have a lot of economic pathology that is free to run, builds up, and is going to create a lot of other problems.
Is there no possibility that the president and the Democrats could pull out thorny issues like abortion funding and try and just put through a straight reform bill?
I don't think so. One, because of the political issue. Two, is abortion is very tough to get back in the box. It's almost a perfect zero-sum game. So if you put any additional federal money, which you need to do to get effective reform, then it raises the question, well, okay, can that be spent on abortion or not? You got to answer that question, and that becomes a very binary abortion fight. It's just really hard. Once that came out in the open, it was just very hard to steer the reform debate around it, unfortunately.
There's no way of
All
kind
right,
of working
Richard,
for...
thanks so much for joining us. Richard Evans of Sector and Sovereign.